Saskatchewan has a population of a little over 1.2 million people. Nova Scotia has a little over 1 million. Nearly the same population numbers, yet Saskatchewan has a population density of 1.8 people per square kilometer, and Nova Scotia has a population density of nearly 18 people per square kilometer. So that's a difference of almost 10 times. And then when we talk about the quality, Saskatchewan has the highest grade of uranium in the world. Our low-grade uranium could not compare to that, even if we tried. It's not worth the risk. Saskatchewan's uranium mines are in remote, flat prairies for the most part. This isn't really in order, but there's a picture of one of them. Nova Scotia is full of coastlines, forests, and interconnected waterways. They've struggled to manage uranium safely up there, even with all that size and space compared to us. So how could anybody claim it can be done safely here in such a densely populated area? Uranium mining produces radioactive waste and tailings that remain hazardous for thousands of years. And Nova Scotia's fractured bedrock and granite bodies make water contamination almost inevitable. Once uranium gets into groundwater, it's there for generations. And we don't need hypotheticals either, because we've already been there and seen it. In Harriet's field, uranium contamination has plagued wells for decades, with reports dating back to the 1890s warning of unsafe levels, and families there to this day are still fighting for clean water. In 2018, an elementary school test showed uranium levels of 133 micrograms per liter. The maximum limit, according to Nova Scotia Health, is 20 micrograms per liter, though there's truly no safe amount. And to their acceptable limit, that was nearly 7 times what they deemed acceptable. And this is water that children had been drinking for decades. And as a quick note, remember that over 42% of Nova Scotians rely heavily on well water. The industry says, don't worry, the new methods are safe. They talk about in situ leaching, which has been used in uranium since the 1990s. In situ leaching pumps sulfuric acid into the ground to dissolve the uranium. And another method is the open pit mining. So there's a picture of the in situ leaching mining techniques. So the other method is open pit mining, where the ground is massively exposed to access the underlying uranium ore. An example is right there. Whether it's acid leaching or radioactive dust left above it, both leave behind toxic tailings. In Saskatchewan, every ton of uranium produces about 40 tons of radioactive waste. And remember, this is the highest grade. Imagine how much waste is left behind by low grades. Nearly 70% could be toxic waste product. And those piles don't just disappear either. They sit, they seep, and communities are left with the consequences long after the companies are gone. Cleanup alone can cost billions, and radioactive waste demands perpetual monitoring to avoid environmental disaster. And the truth is, we still don't have safe solutions for storing it long term. So the real question isn't just about uranium, but rather the type of future we choose. Do we want one where we gamble our water, our health, and our children's safety? Or do we invest in what Nova Scotia has in abundance as clean, renewable energy? Our winds are among some of the strongest in the country. and solar is becoming cheaper every year with advances. These are resources that can sustain us without poisoning the ground beneath our feet and the air we heavily rely on to be clean. And to close, I'll just say this. Saying no to uranium isn't saying no to progress. It's the opposite. It's saying yes to innovation, yes to growth, and yes to a future worth fighting for. To a safer, smarter, sustainable future for all Nova Scotians. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela, for your opening remarks, and thank you, Ken and Colby, for sharing your insights. I'm going to share some remarks with you tonight, but really you'll get your best bang for your buck out of me in the question period and speaking with me afterward. I work with Ecology Action Center as an activist, and so what that looks like a lot of the time is people calling me or emailing from across Nova Scotia saying, are you the right person? Because here's what's happening. There's a major threat to my community, a big extraction project or this big idea from away. I'm worried about how it's going to impact the water or the wildlife, this place that I continue to choose to live in. Can you help me figure out the pathways to find out more about it or how to be critical? For some people are like, we've already talked around a kitchen table and we want to fight this. How do we do that? So I'm constantly working with loving Nova Scotians who care deeply about the place that they have been living in for generations or have chosen to live in. They want to work through the regular official routes, like how do I engage in this environmental assessment, or how do I meet with my MLA? Or they want to find creative routes that have always worked around the world as far as acts of resistance. How can we plan a rally? How can we get a petition going? How can we do art with the kids and send it to our leaders? So all of those techniques are actively being used in Nova Scotia and are making progress. And I can describe a little bit about the journey around open pit gold mining over the last 6 years, which I worked a lot with communities on and we worked on from an EAC perspective. And I bring it up because I think it has some transferable lessons to the other battles that we're working on in Nova Scotia right now. So these are some of the elements. It was an idea from away about how rural communities could get fixed by having more jobs and having people either stay there or come back to the area. However, it would take a lot of money and subsidy from government, and it really would come at a high environmental cost. But that was downplayed by government and by the companies saying we always follow all the environmental laws, we're environmental stewards, we would never harm this place that we've invested in. So the journey of what's happened over the last 6 years is that a large open pit gold mine opened on the eastern shore. It's in the area that used to be called Moose River Gold Mine. There was a community there, but the mining company bought everybody out and then got the government to expropriate the remaining people's land. So that is something that happens in Nova Scotia. And now there's a giant open pit there. If you want to see what these kinds of things look like, you can drive on the Mooseland Road along the eastern shore. It connects Muscatawbee Valley down to Tangier area, and you can go past an open pit and see for yourself what it's like. The asset, as the company says that they were going after, is what they now call high-grade ore. And so that is 1 ton of crushed rock produces 1 gram of gold. And so just like with some of the uranium, it's not that these deposits are very rich, they're just relatively rich if you're willing to damage a huge amount of the landscape. So for this project to work financially, the pit had to be massive to get a very small amount of something, which was pitched as something that we need in Nova Scotia and Canada. What that created is a huge tailings pile. So when they crush all of that ore to get the gold or the uranium or whatever, it leaves behind this kind of contaminated dust called tailings. And then the water that touches the whole site is also contaminated. And all of that's stored as a sort of tailings lake and tailings dam. This is one of the riskiest things about a large open gold mine. And so those dams are risky all the way into the future, and they fail around the world all the time. There's actually databases of tailings dams that fail around the world every year. There's a couple new ones every month. So So this was the riskiest thing, and this is one of the things that the community there pushed back against when they found out about it. They said, we're not against development, and maybe there is value in gold, but this tailings dam above the Fish River sounds super risky, and we're deeply concerned about it. So community pushed back against the entire project, and they also pushed for changes to the project. So some people did want the project to come, but they wanted it to happen in the safest way possible. None of those were heard. So the project went ahead, but not with any changes that anyone recommended. Since then, the company has changed their plans as well. So this is something that can happen in Nova Scotia is once a project is accepted for anything from a mine to a wind energy project or whatever, then changes can be made after without seeking consent from people or even notifying them. So the project changed over time, and instead of putting tailings in this giant pile, now they're saying, well, we want to put the tailings in the pit, and they asked for permission changes. So the community was very frustrated again, because once again, they've been shut out from making changes about the project. In the end, part of why the government went for it is they said, well, this is important revenue for the province. We have royalties, which is a rate that companies have to pay when they take something that's not renewable out of Nova Scotia, like oil or gas or gold. Well, mining companies in Canada have loopholes so that they don't have to pay those for the first few years. So many of the mining companies in the world have their headquarters in Canada, so they can make use of the loopholes and other laws in their favor in Canada. So the company took advantage of that and paid no royalties for the first 4 years of operations. And then they paid the rate that partly attracted them to Canada, which is 1% of net profits on the gold. So in the end, they left this massive pit, they left a permanent contaminated site, they broke 23 environmental laws while they were here, and Nova Scotia got $4.5 million in royalties, but spent 2.7 of it replacing the road to the mine because the trucks just flooded. So if we did a full cost accounting, did this place provide some jobs for a number of years? Yes, and maybe people got to stay in Nova Scotia or come back to Nova Scotia, so I never want to begrudge and I never hold anything against people who get to work in their field and get to live where they want. But it did come with a permanent loss for Nova Scotia and people on the Eastern Shore. So these are some of the things to consider as we look at similar extractive projects. Again, the rest of us up here were not against development in communities, but it is contingent on local people becoming involved in asking the critical questions and pressing for those long-term answers as opposed to just what looks good on a 4-year election cycle or what money might come in for right away. If you want to delve into how to read for red flags on a project, that's probably going to be more of a negative impact than a positive impact. I can recommend a book I was just talking to someone about called Failures and Fiascos, Atlantic Canada's Greatest Boondoggles. It's a book that has all these case studies of times when companies from away were like, we have got something for you. You're in Atlantic Canada, you have all these rural communities that don't have jobs. We will bring jobs, we will bring tax revenue. We just need like $20 million to get started and a few other concessions. And then from there, these projects went worse and worse and worse. And in some cases, left large contaminated sites or left municipalities in a hole for money. So look it up, boondoggles in Atlantic Canada. So with those sort of war wounds, I try to see those red flags of projects that on the whole are not going to be great for communities, and then try to advise communities on how to push back against those or how to ask for them. I will say in accessing expertise from other parts of Canada, because there's all sorts of communities in Nova Scotia that are very wise. At one point we brought out an expert in gold mining because we didn't have a lot of expertise in gold mining in Nova Scotia. So this woman, Joan Kuyek, she's been a community activist for years in Ottawa and Ontario, and she came out and did a reading from her book and talked a bit about gold mining in other places. And she said one of the most effective techniques for communities that want to push back against a project is to really articulate a romantic alternate vision for your community. Because ultimately the question is, well, if no to this, then yes to what? You know, we would like more jobs, we would like more assets in our community. If we don't do this, what's everybody's big idea on what we're going to do? So some of the most successful communities were ones that did a piece of work to articulate where the community would like to go instead, and how to go there, and the kind of assets they would need to go there as a community. So I thought there was an incredible insight from a woman who worked her whole career as an activist. So hopefully that sparks something here. And I welcome any of your questions now, or you can always follow up with me later if I need more directions. Thank you to all three of you. That was really informative and interesting. Yeah, it's been a little while since I've been engaged in these issues, and so some of the things I just jotted down that really stood out to me around lazy policy, the comments that have been coming from the Premier, and remembering all of the work that went into the Wheeler Commission was really helpful as well. Also treaty rights, as you were describing, Ken, I think was really helpful, and the importance of us all recognizing what those look like. Uranium mining, I mean, yeah, I was also involved in the original moratorium, I guess that happened in the late 90s or early 2000s. When was the original moratorium? 81. Oh, I was not. I was 5. Yeah, no, I was 5 then, so just kidding. But 2009, thank you. Yes. Right, yes. Gresham Fitzgerald with the Sierra Club and myself and several others were heavily involved in that. But yeah, the comparison that you were raising between Saskatchewan and Nova Scotia, I think was really interesting. And Karen, you talking about the communities and the importance of community organizing, and both you and Colby actually talking about that, and Ken too, with the fracking that was going to happen in your community. I think reflecting on that job narrative versus what the impact long term will be for communities was super interesting and stood out to me as well. So just wanted to highlight a little bit of what I heard. I'm sure you all picked up on some different interesting elements as well, and I'm really curious to hear now, I think we all are, what questions you might have for our speakers this evening. And so we've got Steve is going to go around with the microphone, so go ahead.
Yeah. My name's Barry Leslie. I'm with Colby and the crew down in the valley. Question for Karen. Karen, I'm a retired teacher, but before I taught, I was a pipe fitter. And back in 1978-79, I was working at a place called Snow Lake in northern Manitoba in an underground mine, not an open pit, but it was underground. They were getting gold and zinc primarily out of there, but they also got a number of other minerals that were marketable. So I've seen tailings ponds, because even in the underground mines, they bring it up, they crush it, they take it to a concentrator, and you wind up with a tailings pond. They're just horrible things. But in the gold mine on the eastern shore down Sherbrooke St. Mary's Way, were there any, I don't know what you call them, byproduct minerals that the company had identified? Where I'm going with here is I'm trying to find out if uranium is a byproduct, if the company is mining for gold or something else, but lo and behold, there's uranium there, or thorium or whatever. A, is it identified, and by whom? And B, what do they do about it? Because we could see that, especially with possible fracking up along the Kennecott corridor and the uranium that's in the ground.
Yeah, so the question around the open pit gold mine, which is on the eastern shore of Mooseland. I don't know the answer to that about whether they brought up ore that contains uranium as well. I never heard anything about that, but then again, I'm also not a geologist, so I don't know if those two co-occur. In that open pit gold mine, they only processed for gold. There are other gold mines in Canada and around the world where they do process for more than one thing at a time. So for example, one of the biggest disasters in the mining industry ever was in BC about 14 years ago now, called the Mount Holly mine. So the tailings dam there breached, and the tailings and the water slid down into Holy Lake and Hazeltine Brook, and Quesnel Lake, and those are still contaminated more than 10 years later. And that was an open pit copper and gold mine. I will also say the company made the case that they needed to reopen the mine to get the money to clean up the site, which they have not. And only a couple months ago was anyone found criminally responsible. So there are still First Nations and people living there who can't use the water because it's still contaminated. So the breaching of the tailings dam is no small thing, and people should super question it. Now, something that people bring up, as well as the mining lobby, is, well, gold. Shouldn't we all feel guilty because we have gold in our cell phones? The Mining Association brings that up. We use it every day. You should feel bad if you don't like it because you're benefiting from it. So it's a bit of a guilt trip. I will say if we want to talk about gold, some interesting characteristics of gold is that it can be infinitely recycled. So you can use it over and over again. There's a ton of it on Earth already. We probably don't need to mine anymore for our industrial purposes, our reasons that we need it. And 90% of gold is not mined for the things that we need. It's mined for jewelry or for people to keep in gold bars. It's involved underground. So it comes from the ground, comes back up temporarily, and then goes back underground. So if we're being strategic, mature as a society, it's probably a habit we should stop. If we really are in critical times, this is literally a mineral that we could stop mining now and we'd be fine forever. So I kind of want to take a pass on the feeling guilty. I feel like there are less expensive ways to recycle gold that are much less impactful. Those are the kinds of things we need to be innovating around and doing more around already. Yeah. So we've only been processing gold here, and someone else would have to answer a geology question around, is uranium coming to the surface too?
I also have a question for Karen, and I should probably know this, but when you were talking about the way the company could change things without consultation, like once everything was in play and they could just change the rules and not have to tell the community or get permission or anything, is that a legislative thing? Is that, or is that like a contract with the province, or, how would that have been put in place? And can that kind of thing be avoided? And then the other question I had is, again, about the royalties, because, this is one of the pieces that the government will use to say we need to do these things, is that we need the money, we need to stir the economy, we need jobs, and we also need, we're poor, blah, 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 we need to get money in the economy, we need to get royalties, whatever. Like the 4% wind royalty that we're now hearing about still seems really small, but this is even smaller and more ridiculous. And anyway, my point is that who is that a legislative thing, or is that just contractual each time? Can it change from project to project? Is there a mandate at any level of government to and why these royalty loophole things? At what level of government is that?
Okay, thanks. There's a few things there, and I'm not a pro at answering questions. You're more of a pro at answering questions than me. First question was around process. So this is going to sound kind of nerdy and processy, but absolutely matters to everybody in Nova Scotia, is when there's a big project proposed in a community, like a wind project or a mine or a fracking project or even a quarry sometimes, it goes through a provincial process called environmental assessment. And the company writes up this big long document with all the details of the measurement of the pit and where the office is going to be. And there's required things they have to look at, like how will this impact birds and water and wetlands. So as I think someone said they were a previous educator here, I read a lot of those. I would say if I'm a teacher, these are getting a C as far as the quality. They're really getting a passing grade in answering the questions they were asked. So I've seen many projects approved, even though government and the public didn't really have suitable information in front of them to find out what are the risks, what are the costs and benefits. So the EA process, I'm sorry to say, has been watered down over the years, and it's pretty sad right now. Once a project is approved through the EA process, and they always get approved, then the company needs to get what's called an industrial approval. That's the permit for operating, how much water you can withdraw from the lake and all sorts of other specifics around operating. But they can keep going back to government and asking to change the industrial approval. And so that's how communities find that projects get changed, is the industrial approval gets changed. In the case of the gold mine, it got changed 14 times. So they can do slightly different things. And the community never finds out about those and doesn't have a say in those. So that's what I'm getting at when I say projects can change without engaging community. And this can mean things like new routes that trucks go down, new amounts of processing, new hours per day that the crusher keeps operating. So this is a problem in Nova Scotia, because communities are like, hey, now the quarry's operating 24/7, or now they have more lights on, or now there's more trucks. So it's through changes of industrial approvals that projects change. And the government just watered down the industrial approval process and did a press release and press conference about it and said how fantastic it is. So watch out there. The second question was around gold and royalties. And for the things I'm talking about tonight, including royalties, the Ecology Action Center, in a bit of a cheeky response, when the Premier said we need to take the no out of Nova Scotia in January, we were like, we need to put the no in Nova Scotia, KNOW. And so we wrote a series of fact sheets and put them on our website. Know about uranium, know about fracking, and know about royalties. Like, how much money do we get? So 1% of net profits on gold is some of the lowest royalties in the world. I mean, Burkina Faso charges 5% of pre-profit value of the gold. So we have a shockingly low royalty rate of how much money we bring in for selling off our limited resources. And so the government has said they have been considering increasing the royalty rate for years, but they haven't been doing it. So it's a valid point for elected officials to bring up. It's regulated under the Mineral Resources Act. Your third question was around loopholes that companies can use. Those are mostly at the federal level, because they regulate companies in Canada, and they've made Canada a very inviting jurisdiction for mining companies to come to. So all sorts of terrible mining companies in the world have their headquarters mostly in Vancouver, but in Canada, to make use of the federal laws here that protect them from being prosecuted in other countries, and also give them special tax allowances here. So when the gold mine operated, they paid no taxes for the first 4 years, so no income to any level of government, and then after that, they were paying a couple of taxes for the last 2 years that they operated.
Karen did a good job of talking about it. The regulatory process is best thought of, I think, and I've been hammering away at that environmental assessments and industrial approvals for more than 10 years now. The best way to describe it is Nova Scotia makes it up as they go. You know, governments come, governments go, and sometimes it's worse, sometimes it's better, but it's never good, and it's also always made up. You know, Alberta is no regulatory paradise, but it's a whole lot better than here in Nova Scotia. Another question?
Thank you so much for putting on the panel today. Very happy to be here. I believe this question is for Colby and or Ken, but Karen, obviously, please feel free to chime in. Colby, you mentioned that we have a lower grade of uranium compared to Saskatchewan. And, you know, just some quick research, you can find other countries that mine uranium and, you know, don't have things like OSHA and like safety regulations and are able to provide uranium much cheaper. So if Nova Scotian uranium if it can't be provided at the quality and it can't be provided at the cost, how are we, the collective, we the only ones seeing this? How does the government not put 1 + 1 together?
Am I missing something?
Not really. I believe it was Karen that mentioned that the government likes to work off of their 4-year cycle. So for Tim, if this was his last time running or so, right? It's short-term profit for long-term consequences. So, not really. You see it pretty clear there. And there's so many other factors there as well, like simply disturbing it, the environmental costs, and then remediation and cleanups associated with it, which they may not be considering as well. So that's.
Also, subsidies to get things off the ground. Again, read failures and fiascos. Something can sound like maybe Sue, close your ears for a second. I meet with a lot of elected officials. I am surprised by the lack of science literacy amongst elected officials. People don't have to understand as in depth as you do that this isn't really adding up, especially if you consider the risks and all the other global competition. People are able to make decisions with less of an understanding than that. So sometimes government is convinced, well, we should pour some money into this to get it off the ground, we should provide local jobs, so it doesn't have to pan out in the long run for people to buy into it at the beginning. I will also say with minerals, there is also an industry in mineral exploration. So there are Nova Scotians who have jobs in mineral explorations. There are subcontractors who get work. So that's like a valid economy in Nova Scotia, and the value of that was at the tip of the tongue of the deputy minister when she was questioned about why are we getting into more of this. So that's a form of revenue for the province, is people who are just even doing the exploration. And so the mining company that has the gold mine, they continue to do exploration, which continues to provide data for them to say this project is looking really promising to investors. So the gold mine closed down, it might reopen, but they're already pitching 3 more. So it's very important for that company to constantly be doing work and looking promising. So the exploration part is really important too, even if the mine doesn't have it.
I want to say, Ken, thank you very much for keeping me very direct. And you guys have been incredibly polite as well in your comments. Maybe a little too polite. Ken's comment about politicians being suckers is, or what might have longer he uses. Having been in politics as well, it's painful the level of functional literacy, not functional literacy, science literacy in politics. If I was dealing with a room where I thought the average was grade 10 science, I'd be astonished. And that's having been in some rooms with a lot of politicians. And the industry, the exploration industry, doing work. Like I said, it's almost never be a mine here. Maybe the problem with exploration is you never know where you're going to find a mine. It might look like nothing on the top, and you're just throwing sort of a wild kind of hole, and you hit the best thing in the world. They found the richest nickel deposit in the world. They found when they landed the helicopter for lunch. Sort of story. It's a real weird industry that way. So we'll explore anyways. And bottom feeders is a really good phrase for some of the companies. The one at Mount Paul mine, Canada's fail, and leaving my last mining job, I was offered to be put in contact with that company, and the description by the senior geologist was, there's work, will always be work, but there will run you dry. That's my comment / question.
Does everybody else hear back there? For us, it's like, we hear them as much as you.
I'm from Montana, and it's just coincidental that I'm from Montana. It's coincidental that I used to live in this beautiful place, belonged to a ranch when he sold it to Pegasus. And we had to move, a little bit anyway, but they turned our whole area, it was a beautiful pasture, into a pit of blue water. And they went under, and then we spent a lot of money in the state. You know, they were supposed to fix it, and they never did. They opened it a couple of times. How is it that, and they were from Canada, we heard they were from Canada, how is the connection in Canada that they're letting all these people in the States or anywhere come to Canada to get everything set up? I don't understand that. Why is it Canada? What's the connection with all of them coming from that? I'm sure there's some in the States, but I remember this one that affected us in this part of the country. And this is close to Butte, Montana. If you ever seen Butte, Montana, it was like just make you big and bigger and bigger. But it's kind of good that I came today because I never really thought much about all this, we're dealing with Trump all the time in the States. He's bringing us every day something new. But it's just that you said it was from Canada. What's the process there?
Yeah, I will say, so I don't happen to work on that because the scale that I work at is Nova Scotia, but my understanding, and I can see, is that federally, Canadian government set up a lot of like loopholes and incentives and tax schemes and a whole setup, so it's very advantageous to have the headquarters of your mining company in Canada. So there's all these mining companies around the world that don't have a mine in Canada. If they have their headquarters here, they take advantage of all of the loopholes and advantages here. So I don't know the deep history of that, I just know the setup. Like one of the largest mining conferences in the world is held in Toronto each year. The acronym is PDAC. And people come from all over, well, mining companies come from all over to pitch themselves and stuff. So there's this hub in the world here because of that advantageous taxing area. And there are other groups, other than the Ecology Action Center, who work on accountability. So there's a whole group, a nonprofit that tries to change laws in Canada so that mining companies from Canada who've done horrific things abroad will be accountable under Canadian law.
Yes.
So it's like a whole battle and journey that I'm not that aware of,
Yes.
but that's partly why companies are here,
Seems like
and that's what they can take advantage of. So in the case of the open pit gold mine on the Eastern Shore, it's an Australian company that their Canadian company headquarters is here, and then they can take advantage of all of the advantages here. And so they made hundreds of millions of dollars off of the gold in Nova Scotia. That money mostly went to Australia. And at one point they sold the company from one company to another for $722 million. And then the person who brokered that deal got an award for brokering such an amazing deal. So it's like astronomical amounts of money. And did some of that come to Nova Scotia? But yeah, a really unjust amount of money came to Nova Scotia, I would say.
It's like the same thing. It's like more mining watch.
Yeah, Mining Watch is one of the largest groups in Canada that works with communities on mining issues, but I'm even thinking of another niche group that's just working on the accountability piece. I forget the
Canadian Network for Corporate Accountability, CNCA.
maybe now. Yeah, so there's other Canadians who are onto this, even if I don't work on it. But you can sleep at night that people are onto this.
Just, excuse me, just a couple comments. Did you say you're from Montana?
Yeah.
There are a couple Canadian companies in Montana and Wyoming, and one of the directors of one of those companies was in Windsor, Nova Scotia, about 2 weeks ago, making a presentation to woodlot owners. Just maybe coincidental, but my research didn't find it to be too coincidental. My second comment would be that with reference to politicians that Karen was talking about, over the last few months, I've spoken with 8 Kings County councillors. I've spoken with 5 Town of Wolfville councillors. I've spoken with the Mayor of Windsor. I have spoken with 2 MLAs, Kings West and Kings South. I've spoken very briefly with John Lohr, the MLA for Kings North, but didn't get far there. And I've spoken a number of times with Lisa Lachance, I was on Zoom with her yesterday, and around these issues, sustainable economy, all of those issues. Right now, we're in a situation where it kind of, as Chris Palmer, the MLA for Kings West, said to me, let's assume uranium is off the shelf. Their fear is about groups, quote, like yours, opposing resource extraction in general in the province. So he was talking about economy, and that's been mentioned. we don't want negative, negative, negative. We want to follow it up with positive around sustainable economics, etc. I'm now working with a group in West Isle, that Lake Paul area, not West Isle, it's Lake Paul area, and some students, master students at Katy University, on sustainable use of forests in that area, and actually part of that is trying to get a protected area in the Cloud Lake area. But I think that's something that needs to be done by local citizens. They need to oppose these things. At the same time, you need to start thinking about, well, what's there so a person can put food on the table for their kids. Because a person who can't feed his or her kids could care less about uranium mining or fracking or anything else. So we need to address that. I would urge you all to visit as many counselors as you can and talk to not just your MLA, but others, and also your MP. I've spoken with Cody Boyce a number of times on this. So that would be my comment. Get to work now.
Is there any idea of what the government cost of the resource industries are? Like what they pay for environmental cleanups, what they pay to have their lawyers look at the environmental assessments to make sure they're okay, and just what it costs in general to have this sort of thing going on. Hasn't been even looked at.
Well, for the projects I've looked at, I've never seen a socioeconomic assessment that really looks at what does the government also pay out. Super valid question and good idea, and we should have processes like that in Nova Scotia so that we can make like a level-headed decision that takes in all factors. I've never seen that.
Because they would do it to us. Like I worked for nonprofits for years and had to give budgets, big budgets every year, and the government would assess like how we did on our budget, and we'd have to we would have to account for anything that veered off the budget too much, or if we didn't make the money that we said we were going to make, and stuff like that. We had to justify everything, and we didn't make a lot as a nonprofit anyway. It still was a big deal.
Yeah, a sort of full cost accounting. Yeah, that would be excellent, and that is not done for industrial projects. Quirky thing in Nova Scotia, socioeconomic assessment is done when an area is proposed to be protected. So we're gonna get something great, then there has to be a whole consultant's report on unquoted cost of the economy, and then it ends up showcasing a whole bunch of really great things that would come from that protected area. So that's the only one where the government is required to do a socioeconomic assessment of what would this cost us all and how would we all benefit from it. So yeah, valid point.
I was just going to say to you that the Auditor General's Office has done quite a lot of work on contaminated sites, and if you go onto, I can't remember the numbers right now, but if you go onto the Office of the Auditor General in Nova Scotia and search reports, there's a bunch of stuff. And in fact, I know that when we do the public accounts each year, there's like millions and millions of dollars that are, I forget the word now, I'm on the Public Accounts Committee, but that are like earmarked for future remediation of contaminated sites. And the cost just keeps, it's like a liability, I guess, on the books that keeps going up and up and up as sites, as costs go up, but also as things just don't get cleaned up. But it's just like a crazy amount of money that should have been billed to whatever company caused the contamination in the first place. Anyway, it's interesting to go on and look at the work she's done.
I might just add in terms of socioeconomic reports and studies that one organization that is outside of government that does a lot of research and reporting on this is the CCPA for Nova Scotia, Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. They have a lot of excellent, well-researched reports on this type of thing. Specific to industrial, cost of that government has spent on industrial approvals, etc. I'm not sure that they even could access the cost of the government, right? Like it would take a long time to get everything compiled, I think that they would need. So the Auditor General direction is probably better for that specific side of things. Are there any other questions? I know there's definitely interest in having more conversation, and the speakers are keen to speak with individuals after we wrap as well, if you're interested in hanging around.
I just wanted to say one thing.
Yeah, just hold on till the microphone comes your way.
I find if you go to their office without them knowing, I'm not taking that personal. None of those meetings that I talked about were by phone or letter, they were all in person.
Okay, that's great advice. So just to say from the microphone, if you just show up to an elected official's office to meet with them, then that might be the best strategy. Bird dogging, following them to every community event that they could possibly go to, that is also a very good strategy.
Something else, in terms of, other than, going to see them in person, when writing a letter, something I was informed about just yesterday actually, was that when it comes to writing it, it may actually be a little more effective to handwrite and send off rather than text, or like typing, because a lot of those are actually discarded. I don't know if that's because of, it could be AI spam or what, but yeah, handwritten seems to be a lot more effective.
I also would like to add to put where you live, so they know you are one of their constituents, because a lot of MLAs will not respond to you if you are not in their area. So please put your location when speaking to an MLA so they know where you are from.
Thank you so much to everyone for coming out, and especially to our 3 speakers this evening, Ken, Colby, Karen, thank you. Really appreciate that. Just a quick reminder, if you haven't signed the sign-up sheet and indicated that you want to stay involved, please make sure to do that before you walk away this evening. We are, again, really hoping that a group will form out of the event this evening, so you can continue talking about these issues and raising them in your local community and talking about how to have more impact with your MLA, etc. Again, donation box by the doorway there. If you can contribute to the cost for this evening, no pressure, but that would be wonderful. There are snacks and drinks at the front here. There are signs, there are petitions. Please hang around and get involved. Also, the speakers are going to stick around a little bit if you still have questions or you want to discuss the issues that they raised more, then please do approach them and have a conversation. And thanks again, everyone, for being here.
Thanks, Angela.